Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. She has been called a temptress, a queen, a strategist, and a symbol of power. Her name echoes through history, Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. But beyond the myths and legends lies a true story far more complex, far more human, and far more extraordinary. Welcome to Cerebro Ethos. Today we uncover the real Cleopatra, a ruler caught between two empires, two worlds, and her own fate. Chapter 1, Born of Royal Blood. Cleopatra VII Philopator was born in 69 BCE, into the grand and turbulent world of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the Greek rulers of Egypt who traced their origins to one of Alexander the Great's most trusted generals, Ptolemy I Soter. For nearly 3 centuries, the Ptolemies ruled Egypt not as Egyptians, but as foreign monarchs. They dressed like pharaohs and lived like Greeks, ruling a land they barely understood. Most never even bothered to learn the language of their subjects. But Cleopatra, she was different. From an early age, Cleopatra stood out among her siblings, not just for her intelligence, but for her curiosity and cultural insight. She didn't merely rule Egypt, she became Egyptian. She mastered 9 languages, including Egyptian, making her the first Ptolemaic ruler in over 300 years to speak the language of her people. To the Egyptian people, this wasn't just impressive, it was revolutionary. It was a signal that Cleopatra didn't see herself as a foreign queen, but as the legitimate and sacred ruler of the Nile. She embraced the traditions of Isis, the revered Egyptian goddess of motherhood, magic, and kingship, portraying herself as Isis incarnate. Her subjects didn't just obey her, they worshipped her. In Alexandria, the cultural and intellectual heart of the ancient world, young Cleopatra was raised in a palace of opulence and knowledge. She was not merely taught to rule, she was trained to endure. To navigate deadly court politics, to outsmart rivals, and eventually, to outplay empires. Because in the world of Cleopatra, power was fragile, alliances were fickle, and thrones could be lost as quickly as they were gained. And from this volatile cradle of power, emerged one of the most enigmatic and enduring figures in history. Chapter 2, The Game of Thrones. Cleopatra's road to power was anything but golden. After the death of her father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, Cleopatra ascended to the throne in 51 BCE, not alone, but alongside her 10-year-old brother and husband, Ptolemy XIII, as was tradition in the Ptolemaic dynasty. But co-rule quickly turned into co-conspiracy. Behind the palace doors of Alexandria, tensions simmered. Advisors and generals whispered in the ears of the boy king, fearing Cleopatra's rising independence and popularity. She was too bold, too clever, too Egyptian. Eventually, Cleopatra was forced out of the palace, her face erased from coins, her name stripped from official documents. She was exiled to the harsh deserts of Syria, far from the golden halls she once walked. But Cleopatra was no ordinary queen. She didn't fade into the sandstorm. Instead, she regrouped, raising an army, forging alliances, and preparing for her return. Her chance came in 48 BCE, when a legendary power from the west arrived on Egyptian shores, Julius Caesar. The Roman general had chased his rival, Pompey the Great, to Alexandria during the Roman Civil War. But instead of peace, he found chaos. Egypt was already a tinderbox, and Cleopatra was ready to light the match. In a story now soaked in legend, Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's chambers. Some say rolled inside a carpet, others say hidden in a sack of linens. Either way, when the cloth was unfurled, there she stood. Charismatic, political, unafraid. Caesar was impressed, not just by her beauty but by her intellect, her command of language, and her sheer willpower. This was no damsel in distress. This was a queen playing the long game. Their alliance wasn't just romantic, it was strategic. Together, they defeated Ptolemy XIII at the Battle of the Nile, and Cleopatra reclaimed her throne. But the game was far from over. Chapter 3, Caesar and Cleopatra. It's a scene that has echoed through the halls of history. Cleopatra, smuggled into Julius Caesar's private quarters, hidden inside a rolled-up rug, or perhaps in a linen sack, depending on which ancient source you trust. When unrolled, she wasn't simply a queen in distress. She was a master strategist making her next bold move. Cleopatra knew that to reclaim Egypt, she needed more than an army. She needed Rome. And Caesar, fresh from civil war, hungry for control and intrigued by power, found himself captivated. Their relationship became one of the most legendary alliances of ancient history. Not just a love affair, it was a calculated bond between two world powers. With Caesar's military backing, Cleopatra crushed her brother Ptolemy XIII's forces at the Battle of the Nile. The boy king drowned while fleeing, and Cleopatra ascended once more, this time with Caesar by her side. The two would spend several months together in Egypt, enjoying Alexandria's splendor. Banquets under the stars, intellectual debates in the shadow of the Library of Alexandria, cruises down the Nile aboard golden barges. But Cleopatra's greatest political move was yet to come. She bore Caesar a son, Ptolemy XV Philometor Caesar, better known as Caesarion, Little Caesar. To Cleopatra, Caesarion represented the future. A divine ruler, a bridge between two empires, the living proof that Egypt and Rome could be united. But back in Rome, Caesar's power was growing, and so was resentment. In 44 BCE, just as Cleopatra was preparing to return to Rome with her son, the unthinkable happened. Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March, stabbed 23 times by senators who feared his rising tyranny. Cleopatra was devastated and vulnerable once again. She fled Rome, returning to Alexandria with her child, her dreams of a Roman-Egyptian dynasty hanging by a thread. But Cleopatra wasn't done. In the power vacuum left by Caesar's death, a new struggle emerged, one that would thrust her into the arms of another Roman titan, Mark Antony. And so a new chapter began. Chapter 4, The Roman Tangle, Mark Antony. After Caesar's death, Rome teetered on the edge of chaos. Three men took the reins of power, the second triumvirate. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, Lepidus, and Mark Antony, Caesar's fiercely loyal general and closest confidant. Antony, now tasked with securing the eastern provinces, summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus in 41 BCE. But Cleopatra did not arrive like a queen summoned. She arrived like a goddess descending. Her barge sailed up the Cydnus River, adorned in gold and purple sails, perfumed air trailing behind. She was dressed as the goddess Isis, reclining beneath a canopy of silk, with servants fanning her and musicians playing softly. The message was clear. This was not a mere ruler. This was divine royalty. Antony was spellbound, but Cleopatra didn't rely on beauty alone. She brought charm, wit, intelligence, and most importantly, the wealth of Egypt. She needed a Roman protector. He needed resources, grain, and gold to fund his ambitions. What began as political theater soon evolved into a passionate and controversial alliance. They returned to Alexandria, where Antony stayed for months, immersed in Egyptian luxury and culture. There, the two became not only lovers but co-rulers, staging elaborate public events and celebrating Egyptian rituals. In time, their union produced 3 children: Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene II, Ptolemy Philadelphus. But Cleopatra's boldest move came in 34 BCE, the donations of Alexandria. In a grand ceremony, she and Antony proclaimed Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, as the rightful heir of Rome, dismissing Octavian's claim. They also distributed territories to their children, treating them like future monarchs of an Eastern empire. To Egypt, this was triumph. To Rome, it was treason. Octavian, watching from the heart of Rome, saw Antony's actions not just as betrayal, but as war. And so the final act was set. A queen and her Roman lover, daring to stand against the tide of a rising empire. Chapter 5, The Fall of a Dynasty. The alliance between Cleopatra and Mark Antony had become more than politics and passion. It was a challenge to the very soul of Rome. By 31 BCE, the world stood on the edge of a reckoning. Octavian, driven by ambition and vengeance, declared war, not on Antony alone, but on Cleopatra herself. The Battle of Actium was no ordinary clash. It was a decisive showdown on the Ionian Sea, hundreds of warships clashing in a brutal naval encounter. Cleopatra, aboard her royal barge, commanded her fleet beside Antony. But miscommunication, Mistrust and Octavian's superior tactics turned the tide. Amid chaos and smoke, Cleopatra's fleet broke ranks and retreated to Egypt, and Antony followed. The battle was lost, but the war was not yet over. Back in Alexandria, the lovers tried to rebuild their shattered hopes. But the enemy was relentless. Octavian invaded Egypt. The walls of the once mighty Ptolemaic dynasty crumbled. In a tragic twist of fate, Antony received false news that Cleopatra was dead. Desperate and heartbroken, he fell on his sword, choosing honor over capture. But Cleopatra was alive. As he lay dying, she had him brought to her hidden chamber. There, surrounded by fading symbols of their shared dream, he died in her arms. Grief-stricken, Cleopatra now faced the unimaginable. A Roman parade, chains, humiliation, her name etched in history as a defeated queen. She had ruled not only as a monarch, but as a strategist, a mother, and a goddess in the eyes of her people. And she would not end as a trophy. In her final act of sovereignty, Cleopatra chose death on her own terms. Legend whispers of a venomous asp, a snake hidden in a basket of figs. Others say she used a poisoned comb, or a secret vial sewn into her robes. The truth lost to time. But what remains is this. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, died as she had lived, proud, defiant, and unforgettable. Her son, Caesarion, was executed shortly after. And with that, 3,000 years of Egyptian monarchy ended. Egypt became a Roman province, and the ancient kingdom of the pharaohs faded into history. But Cleopatra's legacy endured, echoing across art, literature, and legend. She was not just the last queen of Egypt. She was the last spark of a world that once believed its rulers were gods. Chapter 6, Legacy of a Queen. With Cleopatra's death, the sun finally set on ancient Egypt's pharaonic era. Egypt became a Roman province, and the last thread of independence was severed. The temples grew silent, the divine lineage of the pharaohs broken. But the woman behind the crown, her story was only just beginning. Cleopatra was never forgotten. Roman historians painted her as a seductress, a foreign temptress who bewitched Caesar and Antony. But that was propaganda, a victor's narrative written by her enemies. For centuries, poets, playwrights, and painters have reimagined her. From Shakespeare's tragic heroine to Elizabeth Taylor's silver screen portrayal of opulence and passion. But peel away the myths, and you find a woman far more complex than any script or scroll. She was multilingual, speaking as many as 9 languages. She was a scholar, educated in philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy. She was a shrewd politician, navigating the brutal tides of Roman ambition to keep Egypt sovereign. She was a queen, not only by blood, but by brilliance. While the world remembers her love affairs with Caesar and Antony, it's easy to overlook her greatest love, Egypt itself. She wasn't simply clinging to power. She was fighting to protect a culture, a people, and a legacy thousands of years in the making. Today, her image adorns coins, statues, novels, and film. Her name remains a symbol of power and allure, but also of strength, resilience, and strategy. In modern movements for women's empowerment, Cleopatra is often cited not just as a beauty icon, but as a trailblazer. Because in a world ruled by men, Cleopatra didn't just survive. She ruled, she fought, and she left a mark no conqueror could erase. So who was Cleopatra? A lover, a ruler, a symbol, a legend. Perhaps she was all of them, and more. In conclusion, and so ends the tale of Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. A queen born of ancient blood, who stood at the crossroads of 2 mighty worlds, the fading light of pharaonic Egypt and the rising tide of imperial Rome. Her life was a symphony of power, passion, intellect, and resistance. She played the game of empires not from the shadows, but boldly as a strategist, a scholar, and a sovereign. She navigated storms that would drown lesser rulers. She faced legends, Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, Octavian, and became a legend herself. And in choosing her own death, she chose how history would remember her. Not as a trophy of conquest, but as a monarch who ruled and fell on her own terms. Over 2,000 years later, we still speak her name. Not just because of who she loved, but because of how she led. Because of what she dared. Because she was more than myth. She was a queen who carved her place in history. If Cleopatra's story teaches us anything, it's that legacy isn't given, it's earned. And hers? It's eternal. So what do you think? Was Cleopatra a cunning seductress or a strategic leader? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more epic stories from history.